Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trauma and Friends We Made Along the Way podcast. This podcast is going to focus on a series of events that caused a group of women, who otherwise would have never met each other, into joining a cult. This cult involved scams, makeup, and murder. Each episode, we will have a different guest that will come on and discuss their individual experiences within this organization. We will also be discussing themes of trauma and emotional abuse. So please, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey.
Hey.
Hey. So we want to welcome everybody to the Trauma and Friends We Made Along the Way podcast, otherwise known as the TFP podcast. We are here to talk about a really strange set of circumstances that has led to a larger discussion of what's going on with using the internet to create cult-like environments, which I think is a really big topic right now for a lot of people, since social media is one of the largest ways people connect. So I'm Persephone, and this is my amazing co-host Jess, and we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about everything that's kind of going on with what happened to us personally. The format of this is we're going to have guests on who were a part of the community that we were in as well, part of this cult, for lack of a better word. And we're going to talk about, how it affected us then and how it still affects us now, and different themes that went on during the situation. So today is mostly going to be Jess and I talking about what happened to us specifically, our timeline, our personal timeline, and what led us to create this podcast, and kind of go from there. So Jess is going to start us off with talking about her experience and how she came to this podcast here.
Yep, I'm Jess, and it's not just a fun fact at parties. We were in a cult, and it happens a lot more and a lot easier than you think. And once we get down to the nitty-gritty of it all, I think you guys are really gonna understand where we were at and how we got here. Especially considering that this started approximately 10, 11 years ago, I believe, in 2014. Sound correct?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Alrighty. So personally, I found a very nerdy jewelry page on Instagram. And it seemed really cool. It was really hard as a woman at the time who was into what you'd classify as the nerdy type of interests. Your fandoms that now kind of take over, especially when you go to your Comic-Cons and stuff like that. It was really hard at the time to find things that were themed to that you could wear on a daily basis, that were nice and not super obvious as to what they were. And it was really cool to find a community online that you could join that supplied some of those things that you could wear to work and that you could wear on your daily basis, and that were they were very classy looking at the time, and like they didn't they didn't stand out too much. I mean, I wore that stuff every day. I don't know about you, but
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, and so it just became like became a staple, and it was really cool that once you kind of followed that rabbit hole, that you found a group on, well, I think I ended up joining a Facebook group originally, where all these people were talking about it, and they were talking about all the cool things that were going on, and it kind of started to really form a community. That there was a set of sisters that kind of led the community, because they were the ones that had these businesses, and it was really cool to get to know them on like a personal level, and get to know everybody else within that community, because personally, as somebody who isn't the strongest socially all the time, it was really really cool to have that internet group that you could drop into and just like, even if you're just hanging out and just watching people and like and reading their stories and being supportive. Even if, well, I mean, personally, I'm located in Canada.
Yeah.
We had people from all over. There's people in England even, and was there anybody from Australia?
I think there was. I think there was at some point. I know there was someone from France too. Like there were a few European people as well. So
Yeah.
it was pretty international,
Yeah, so
honestly.
that was kind of neat, and it took off kind of in the best way. Like in the beginning, we definitely had those. I'd call them almost social gatherings. There were the competitions and stuff where
Mhm.
we all got to participate in some
Yeah.
wacky, weird challenges and make eggs at 2 a.m. for no other
Yeah.
reason other than to win points and like
Yeah.
do crazy stuff. And um, things kind of tensions got really high. I think during the second round of that
Yeah.
situation, and people became pretty aggressive towards each other and then even towards outsiders of the group,
Hmm.
because the three sisters, when they decided to start a makeup company, didn't they?
Yeah.
When was that?
It was a little bit before COVID because I remember the first influencer stuff started coming during COVID because I was bored and I was like, oh, I can play with the different makeup palettes and stuff because what else do I have to do right now? So I would go in and play with it. So it was around, I want to say that 2019. Yeah, because I had moved into my house. So it was around like 2019 when
Okay.
the makeup company really started to kick off. Like they, really
Yeah.
started to pick up.
So yeah, I think around then too is when we it was that mob mentality almost that started, where we
Mhm.
were quite quick and easy to jump um almost at anybody who said anything negative about those people in
Mhm.
our group, our our online family, if
Yeah.
you will. And so that was that was a weird time. There was a lot of strange things that were happening, from mailed feces to uh I think there was doxing at one point even,
Yeah,
and
there
um
was.
a lot of that, a lot of really scary stuff happened. And then as their business started to skyrocket, I think it was really difficult, just keeping up with that demand. And then things kind of started to spiral down from there.
Yeah.
And because we were on that ground floor of that, we were promised a lot of things that were never followed through on, and a
No.
lot of money was taken, a lot of ideas were taken, and a lot of promises were broken, and a lot of people were left really, really hurt at the end of the day with this. And um, you can kind of joke about it now. I do use it as like an opener. Is, haha, I've been in, what's one of those three things that isn't true? Oh, I've been in a cult. Well, you haven't been in a
Put
cult.
down a finger if you've been in a cult. Like it's
Yeah. And the group imploded, and now I think that, I mean, still a lot of people are in contact with each other, and I think a lot of people are still active within their circles and stuff like that. And it's really cool to have seen people grow in the last 10-12 years from, well, personally, I was young. I was a teen. I was just out of my teenage years when I joined. And it's really cool to see everybody who's grown in that time period, and see where they are at now versus where when you first met them, sort of thing. But I think a lot of people, well, I don't know if there wasn't anybody who wasn't hurt in this process, really, at the end of the day.
everyone. Mm-mm.
Um, and I think that you and I have kind of just decided to bring our story, well, lead the charge on the story a little bit and bringing it to the masses. Not in hopes that anybody feels attacked necessarily, just in a opening an honest conversation as to what it can be like to not only be in these situations, but how you get in these situations and what that hurt looks like at the end of the day. Because I think that you can you can punch me in the face, but you don't get to tell me it didn't hurt.
The gaslighting is not a thing.
Yeah. So I think that I was a little bit more of a background character in a lot of that, but um, it still sucks the same to see it all and to really learn the extension of it. I mean, I dropped off of social media kind of at the end of the implode, and then when I popped back in, and I was looking at the aftermath, looking around, and it's like one of those kids that wakes up at the end of like a movie where everything's on the ground, and you're like, "What happened?" And here
Yeah.
we are. But yeah, that's kind of what brought me to this position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that, because it's so funny when, even though, you and I've talked plenty of times, like even hearing it again, like more things come up, because it's like you forget these little parts because it was so much time. I think that's what people don't understand is, when we talk about the term grooming, when you're talking about sexually assaulting someone, it takes years. It's not something that happens immediately. And the same thing happens with cults. This isn't something that happens within a day. Like when you talk about the more famous cult leaders like Jim Jones, he had a whole church that was doing good works in different places for a long time. It took years before they moved out of the country and formed their little town. It's not something that happens overnight, because if someone came up to you and said, "We're moving to Bolivia tomorrow and we're going to form this community," you'd look at them and be like, "Okay," like that's a little bit much. Like you have to build trust. And it was the same thing because it started so long ago and it didn't implode until the last couple of years. And, you're talking about a 10-year time period from start to not, and we're not even finished, because one of the things that Jess and I were talking about for our listeners is how when we decided to do this podcast, a couple of strange things happened. I know for me, I created the Instagram account and I didn't really have, like, there were no followers yet, nothing. It was pretty open. A couple people started to follow, and suddenly one of the women who led the group popped up on the people you know thing. And I'm not friends with her. I actually have her blocked. So for her to pop up, I found really interesting. And then suddenly the account was attempted to be hacked a few times. And I know, Jess, you mentioned one of them blocked you
Yeah, and I had
within.
been
Yeah.
blocked at that point. Like I when I say I was like I witnessed a lot of it. I didn't have a lot of interaction with too many people and too many interactions with the girls leading the group. I did kind of with um the one who we believe may have tried to hack the page. That was where
Mhm.
more of my interactions came from. Um, but the one who blocked me, I I had one or two interactions with here over that 10-year period, but it was really interesting. Or a memory or something had come up on my Facebook about being, and I tagged a whole bunch of people from the group, and she happened to be one of them, and the tag was blanked, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because I don't think she's not on social media anymore, and
Yeah.
that's when I found out was then.
Yeah. So someone is clearly like still telling them information about all of us, like keeping tabs. And that was one of the reasons we decided that honestly, we don't feel like mentioning their names is worth it, because it's not about just bringing awareness to what they did. It's more about these are the warning signs to watch out in your own personal lives. These are the things that can happen when you allow yourself to like stop listening to that intuition that says this doesn't feel right, like something feels off. Because I know with my experience, which I'll get to in a minute, like there were several moments that I completely ignored it because of all of the other stuff that had happened. And then finally there was a moment where something just clicked and I was like, this is just not okay anymore. Like I've hit a point where now I'm complicit, because unfortunately a lot of us became complicit in this. Now, were we directly in the reason why it happened? Absolutely not. But there were plenty of times where we didn't stand up. We didn't say something when something didn't feel right. And that's not victim blaming. It's now I need to take that awareness and translate it into other areas of my life of if I see it, I need to be brave enough to say something because ultimately we all have agency and you can decide what you want to do with that agency, but if we continue to be complicit, eventually, following orders is not a legitimate reason.
Yeah.
It's really not because, now some went a little more extreme than others, but we all did stuff. We all either we turned a blind eye or we were actively involved, and then of course there were plenty who left along the way and either they said something or they didn't, but unfortunately that hold over us was really strong and we just weren't paying attention. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of that stems from a lot of us were lonely. A lot of us didn't have the friends in real life that we could talk to about our passions because, there are so many spaces where if you bring it up, you get questioned, are you really a fan? You get questioned, you get asked the most obscure question, like, do you know the second album of this band and their, B side, whatever, because they want to know you're a true fan. But in this space, you could be as casual or as serious a fan as you wanted and you were still a part of the group. And some of these people have become some of my best friends. Like I'm going to two of their weddings in the next year.
Yeah.
I'm going to two of them, not one, but two. Like some of them have come visited me. I've had some of them stay at my house. There's some that I talk to still every single day. And I would freak out if I didn't hear from them because something's wrong because I talk to them all the time. So there is a level of good that came out of it, but there is a level of really not so good either that, where I think coming to terms with that and talking about how it affected all of us and how we got to that point can help other people avoid the same thing.
Yeah. At the end of the day, yeah, it's we unfortunately we all do hold a little piece of blame. A lot of
Mhm.
us are, it's that smaller maybe because we turned a blind eye, and there are a couple individuals that hold a good 96% of that.
Yeah. The other four
Gotta
is
split
divided
evenly
amongst
by
like
three.
2,000 people. Yeah.
um but at the end of the day, um I know that I try to look at it as why, and I know that on a personal level, I know that a couple of them did have a lot of stuff going on personally that may have made them act out of character and stuff like that. But at the same
Hmm.
time, there is still that ownership of, at the end of the day, you did hurt people and you did
Hmm.
you did do some stuff that wasn't stellar. And we are allowed to talk about that and say, hey, man, that hurt. And that's what we're doing. And hopefully by us going, hey, yeah, this happened to me, and here's how, hopefully, if you've been in the situation or if you're staring down something similar, you can learn how to walk away, or maybe you can learn to kind of heal from it a little bit more. Because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there are still bits where I sit here and I go, oh, I can't trust that person because of X, Y, and Z, because of the, you know what I mean? Like, you end up down that rabbit hole because you haven't fully healed from some of the stuff that's gone on within this.
100%. I still have some people blocked from moments that happened in the group, and like one of those moments was it was actually towards the end of everything, which led me to start questioning stuff. Someone questioned why I was at a theme park with my family when my brother had bought my ticket because I had been offering services to help pay for my divorce, and I posted the picture and suddenly I was getting jumped on. People were saying the nastiest stuff to me. They didn't understand that again, my brother paid for my ticket. I didn't pay for it because he knew I was going through a hard time, but I shouldn't have had to justify that. But part of that came from the fact that the women who ran the group were constantly doing that. They would ask for money and ask for help, but then they would go buy like VR headsets for their kids, multiple, not just one to share. Each of the kids had to have their own VR. I don't
Yeah.
even have a VR headset. I wasn't begging, I offered services in exchange. Like, I'll make you a scarf if you pay me $20, like something like that. And it turned into this whole, we had to constantly be at each other's throats because they had primed us to be that way. They had made it so that if anyone said anything or did anything, you immediately had to go for the jugular. There was no private message of like, hey, this looks kind of bad. Can you explain it to me? Excuse me. It was, let's publicly go after you. Let's make it a problem to where, I'm sitting there with my dad and my brother crying because they're accusing me of all these things, and my brother's like, he almost took my phone and was like, let me talk to him,
Oh,
because he's a lawyer, so he was like immediately upset about it, because he's
yeah,
like, you shouldn't be upset when you're with your family. But and that, again, that was about towards the end, because that was about 2021.
yeah,
So that was towards the end of everything, in terms of the main events that happened. But my story is a it's similar, but there are some differences in it. I joined one of the subscription boxes back in 2014. I had found it online. I'd found one of the Ease subscription box. We're going to use initials, by the way, for our listeners. I had found Ease subscription box, and I had joined it back in about 2013, 2014. And a friend of mine from college had found the Facebook group and actually invited me to it. And because I had introduced her to the subscription, and she's like, oh my gosh, they have, a Facebook group. Why don't you join? And at that time, it was a much smaller group. It was still fairly new. It didn't get big for a few more years. So it was a little bit easier to manage. And at that time, there were some subgroups, but those are mostly the common houses that we had that are similar to Harry Potter, where you could be that, and that's what we used for the competitions. By the end of this, there were subgroups for literally everything from Animal Crossing to video games to
the
different
makeup.
movies and
Uh,
makeup,
yeah,
everything. Oh my gosh, there I had like at least 20 to 30 subgroups along with the main group
yeah,
that I was in. And so it was this constant, that was your interaction, and that's what I mainly used Facebook for, was those groups. But in the beginning, I became very close with E and another girl named Alicia. And Alicia ran part of their business for them. And she also ran the Gryffindor Common House, which is the one I was in. She was also from Kentucky, where I'm from, and we bonded over bourbon. We would talk about bourbon all the time. She was also friends with the friend of mine who got me into the group. So I talked to her constantly. And then one day, there was some drama where Alicia spoke out against them, and it became an all-out civil war within the
yeah,
group. I forget, that was probably, I want to say, around 2016, 2017, somewhere in there.
yeah. Because
Uh,
that was during one of those competition events, wasn't it?
yeah.
Because that was
It's,
when people
yeah.
were accused of cheating or like
Yeah.
favoritism and all that other good jazz.
Yeah, there was some cheating accusations, and she started bringing up stuff the women who ran the group were doing, and she's one of the ones, like, I think that's when some of the doxing happened. That's when the feces were sent in the mail. Like, that's when a lot of that started to pick up, and it got really out of control, and pretty much all the blame was put on Alicia and anyone who followed her.
Yeah,
And honestly, since we started this podcast process, I've had a lot of like hindsight is 2020 moments where I wish I still had her contact information to reach out and be like, hey, I now I'm realizing like this situation might have actually been a completely different one than what I perceived, because of what I was being told. And unfortunately, I don't have a way to contact her anymore. Not I'm not even sure she'd want to talk to me, to be honest. But it became a choice of who do you believe, and she was being accused of doxing. So who am I going to go with? I'm not going to go with the person who's doxing somebody. That's dangerous. And, these women had children.
yeah,
So that's, I'm going to be concerned about that. And that was also around the time that the group had gotten bigger, because one of the women who ran the group, one of the triplets, had taken a bunch of cough medicine and in the middle of the night approved like 1,000 people into
Yeah.
the group, including my in real life best friend who'd been on the wait list forever, because you basically hung out on the wait list for months until they decided just to let a few in. And she got let in. So the joke was like the cough syrup 1,000 or something like that, like the
Yeah.
cough medicine 1,000. And she added it all. And that's when I think they really started to crack, because it became such a big dynamic. They had lost Alicia, there'd been this civil war. You have a ton more people, and at the same time they're trying to start this makeup company, which I think was one of their ultimate goals, was to start the makeup company. And we were all excited about it when it started, but I think that's when they realized that running a subscription box business does not translate into a nationally sold makeup brand, because they had a deal with Ulta, and they
Yeah.
had deals with a lot of different copyrighted, stuff. They had made deals with all sorts of copyrighted things, and a lot of their makeup palettes were themed with those copyright permissions. So, that's a lot of change in business, going from simply made handmade jewelry, and hand designed postcards and different stuff that they designed, where you're allowed to do that, versus we're going to sell at a national level and be in these stores and have all this stuff. And I think they didn't understand how business works. They didn't understand taxes and the legalities of a lot of this, because remember, they got in trouble with their first set of brushes because they made them Harry Potter but didn't have the licensing,
Yeah. Because
and
they
they
were
had to stop
all
selling.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were
Yeah.
selling a garage effectively in the beginning,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then they turned that to a lab down in California and shipping on an international level. And
Yeah.
I'm from Canada, and I moved abroad for a bit, and even going into the UK, people knew about that. Like, I was shocked to some degree, but not shocked when people were like, "Yeah, no, I've heard of like the," and people who weren't in the group, who technically wouldn't know who these people were, suddenly were like, "Oh, wait a second, this is a lot bigger than even like you knew it was popular, but it was a whole different ball game
Hmm.
when you realized how popular it was."
Yeah. I mean, they were making deals with Hot Topic. They were going to these big meetings, and I really think they bit off more than they could chew too fast. Like, they went way too quickly and did not have the right level of support. And I think that's when the cracks really started forming, because that's when more people started arguing in the group. People started leaving but weren't saying why. Um, they started inviting a bunch of us to be influencers, but instead of having
Yep.
like one or two influencers, they had a ton of us. Like, it was over a couple hundred. It was quite a few. And I remember I was close to the triplet we call E. E and I were actually, we talked all the time, and she had made a comment that her sister M was not supposed to invite all those people. Like, they had said they weren't going to do influencers, and she suddenly did. And so there was a little bit of stuff, I think, happening behind the scenes we weren't fully aware of. But that's when both E and M started separate groups to basically earn money, which we were all a little confused by at first, because we're like, well, don't you own these companies? But this was around the time that Phantom of the Month, which was the subscription box I belonged to, started to have issues, and we weren't getting boxes. I got like triple charged at one point, and I still hadn't got, I was like owed boxes, like at least a couple, and it became this huge problem, and it wasn't getting fixed. And so I'm like, okay, clearly they've put aside this business and they're doing the makeup. But yet then you have this Facebook page where you're like, we're gonna do giveaways and illegal raffles and do all these different things and try to raise money. But it turned out they weren't delivering on any of those giveaways, or if they did, it wasn't what you were promised, or it was so late it
Yeah.
would be months behind. Like, I won like two giveaways for custom Starbucks cups, never got them. Never got them. And when I asked about them, one of the excuses she gave is that her cat knocked them all off the counter and just broke them all. All like 20 of the blank cups she had gotten and was going to customize. And I'm like, that seems like I don't know, that seemed weird, and it was always an excuse. And then she was doing things like giving away the makeup from the makeup company as if it was just free inventory, which if you know anything about business, you're not really supposed to do that. Like you can't just give away inventory that way. Like you have tax implications to those kinds of things, like because you have to sell it. I mean, that's what inventory is. And that's when she started with a lot of the scams. I was not close enough with M to know what she was doing, but
Yeah,
E,
my stuff was more the M.
yeah, yeah. E was doing things. She did two different scams on me, including a PayPal refund scam where you would accidentally get refund a makeup order and she'd said, "Oh, send me it again. I'm so sorry." And then suddenly the refund would cancel, so you've paid for it twice.
Yeah,
And
she
then
pulled one of those on me
yeah,
too. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And she was doing, and it was such an environment of toxicity that a lot of us weren't talking to each other
You didn't trust
when
each
that was
other.
happening. No,
No?
you didn't. Even the people that you talked to, you still didn't really
You
tell
realize
them because, yeah, because you knew that if you said something, it was getting back to somebody. Like that was the issue. Is it's going to get back to somebody. And then she did another scam on me right after I had talked to her about posting in the group to raise money for my divorce retainer because I was struggling with that. And I had already planned a trip that had been pushed due to COVID to visit my dad and my family out in California, which is expensive. And so a lot of my free money had already been taken for this trip, and I had, of course, because of COVID, I hadn't seen my family. I'd like to go see them. And when I had posted, she said, all right, I'd posted in the group, and several of the women had just donated money. They didn't ask for a service in return. Many of them just said, like, pay it forward when you can. And so when she did the second scam on me and I said something, she's like, well, we helped pay for your divorce. Even though she didn't, it's because she allowed me to post in that group and it got thrown into my face that, well, like, we've helped you. And I was like, okay, that's really cool, but you're now scamming me. Mine was in the tune of about almost $500
yeah.
that she tried to scam me, claiming that her electricity was getting shut off and needed help. And she's like, I'll refund. And keep in mind, the orders she was refunding to do this scam were like 6 months old.
Yeah.
They were like orders that had just been hanging out and I had been patient about because they were my friends. And that's when I got really suspicious. I was like, this is getting to be too much. And she sold, do you remember that when she sold the pots and pan set, the really ugly one, and she sold it like twice? I got paid
Yep.
back with some of that money. And that's when I was like, so she's robbing Peter to pay
I,
Paul.
literally.
It's, yeah. And so I messaged my brother about it. And my brother was like, start talking to some other people. Again, he's a lawyer. He's like, start talking to some other people and we'll see what we can do. And so I messaged my friend Christina and a couple others. And I was like, hey, like this is going on. Are you all concerned about it? And suddenly the conversations are blowing up. Like people were like, yes, this is happening to me, or this is happening to someone, and they told me about it. And it was this whole like big ripple effect. So I went back to my brother, and he's like, you do know because one of the triplets lives in California. They have very specific like laws about this kind of stuff. So I actually had a meeting with the Attorney General of California. Now, unfortunately, they could not help because they said because it went internationally, it would be better to take it to the federal level. And I know some of us tried with like the FTC and all these different things because they also were in trouble with the IRS. Like one of them got their house repossessed over not paying business taxes, but yet they're giving away all this inventory. There was a lot of this, like, I don't know where all this money was going, but it's like the sock fairy took it all and like shoved it in the back of everybody's dryer. Like I don't know where these hundreds of thousands of dollars went, but apparently hundreds of thousands of dollars went somewhere.
Yep.
And
It
that's
was
when people started blowing up and being mad at each other. And she ended up I think the big moment for me, and I know that was for all of us, when she said that we were never really her friends, when E said that in the Facebook
Yeah.
page, and then proceeded to unfriend slash block all of us, because
Yep.
we started calling her out, and we realized that we'd been scammed multiple times, that almost every single one of us had been scammed in some way,
Yeah.
and some
Yeah.
some to the tune of thousands of dollars. And
Oh,
she was using people's PayPals, that whole thing too.
yep. Because she didn't have access to hers. And then at one point, I know
Mhm.
M had created a PayPal for their child, um, to use
Mhm.
that instead because their PayPal was inaccessible. Because I'm in Canada, um, a picture of my ID was asked for.
Mhm.
Um, take supposedly to take money out of a gambling site. Um, I never did send that over, thankfully. Um,
Gosh.
because, well, I thought it was a little weird, but at the time too, I was going through a lot of personal stuff, and I wasn't as frequent online, and so but even then, even I knew I was like, this is something's funky here. That doesn't
Yeah.
sound right.
To ask for ID and to make a Facebook, or not Facebook, but a PayPal for your child, like toddler, because he was
Yeah,
what, like
he was
2 or 3 at
two,
the
three.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah. He was a baby, and you're
yeah,
making a PayPal, but she used multiple other women's PayPals to do the refund stuff because she didn't have access, but then they were on the hook for all taxes associated with that, with other legalities. Some of them paid these refunds out of their own pocket and never got that money back, so there was this level of trust that was extremely abused. And because they created that environment of everybody was scared of each other
yeah,
at the same time, that you weren't talking. There was a lot of divide and conquer situations because they took the time to talk to a lot of us so much individually.
yeah,
Like I have hundreds of screenshots with my conversation with E for going back years,
yeah,
just because I decided to save all of that for the sake of, I don't know what purpose, because I know we talked about a lawsuit at one point. And that's one of the episodes we're going to be talking about, is why didn't we do more legally?
yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of reasons why, but you kind of, when you, again, that hindsight's 2020. I mean, we were such a trusting group that we were one of the alibis for a murder that was featured on, like, was it 2020 or Dateline? I can't remember, but it's one of those.
I think it was both. My mom's an avid watcher, and it came
Yeah,
up twice. And
it's
yeah,
yeah,
I brought it up, and I was,
like,
I knew her, and my mom's
yeah.
what?
We all gave her money for her kids after the murder too. So
Yeah,
to clarify for our listeners, there was a member of the group who planned the murder of her husband, and her boyfriend at the time was a part of it, and she was posting in the group while this murder was happening, like that she couldn't find her husband and all these things. And so we basically became one of the alibis because she was so worried about him. And it was discovered a couple of years later, because the boyfriend basically turned state witness. But it is an episode of a crime show.
yep.
um
And a
oh
national one at that. I mean,
yeah.
well, I mean, we're seeing it up here in Canada, so
Yeah, like it's I'm sure I could pop it on the TV right now if I really wanted to, but that's the level of trust that we work to each other. People would share all sorts of things and talk to each other all the time, but at the same time you knew if you went against the leadership, that's when you
you
would
would
have a
be
problem.
isolated, and you would be removed, and you would be made to look terrible. There are several individuals who were accused of doing what the leaders were doing themselves, and they were not only outed, but they were attacked, and they were I cannot imagine what it was like for them to be. And I'll be honest, I don't know how much of the how many of them did actually what they were accused of being to do,
Yeah.
or or if what they had done, if it had been blown out of proportion because it was a look over here, not towards the leaders.
Yeah. And I that's what I wondered with Alicia is like how much of that was actually accurate. You know, it could have been accurate. I won't ever know that answer.
No.
But the fact that we are asking that question, I think is what's most important is how much of this was the truth. Cause like I got thrown to the wolves over being at a theme park
Yep.
with my family, you know, and that to me that was my first taste of being on that receiving end.
Yep.
And to this day, this is also why I lurk so much in groups, you know, like I know I told you recently I had joined a book club
A
that
book.
turned out to so the leaders of the book club were trying to turn it into a Jim Jones sex cult situation. And I was only in that group for like 2 weeks, so I was on the very outskirts and I had lurked and I got told what was happening and shown the receipts. And I immediately called my dad and was like, it happened again. Only this was like a sex cult thing. Like they wanted to have like an eco community and have everybody out there, and they're like, we're gonna just be poly and all this stuff all the time, like totally denigrating what poly actually means. Um, but I was like, how did this happen? But luckily, of course, it didn't really happen to me again. I just so happened to be on the outskirts of it. And I've actually talked to some of them about if we want them to come on as guests at some point in the future to talk about their experience because it uses Discord as the means to do that. So there is still this level of divide and conquer, the same kind of themes we're seeing because it's funny. I have a friend who really hates cult documentaries because she's like, it's all the same. Like they all, and I'm like, because it's a pattern. Like you have to do the same thing. You have to divide and conquer. You have to groom. You have to do these things, and you test the waters. You do these little like trust trials. And I think that's some of what the competitions we had were is like, how much we can we get them to do? How
Oh
much
yeah.
weird can we get them to do?
At 2 a.m. finding a bike helmet, a tutu, and something else to dress up in to take a picture of. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah. Like going into Target and singing Katy Perry's "Roar" at the top of your lungs is
Yeah.
loud in like the middle of a busy Target, you know, and
Yeah.
you have 2 hours to do it, and so you have to run to the Target and immediately get there. And so I find it interesting that I had this like weird sort of semi-second experience because I again was not deeply involved in the group. But hearing their stories, I just sat here and I sent an audio message on Discord. I'm like, you all have no idea how lucky you were and how similar this was to what I experienced. And I'm so glad you all got out of that. You know, like this is, you know, because we formed a separate Discord to talk about what happened. And that's when everybody could kind of decompress. And I offered my experience to be like, hey, this is what they could have easily done. And you all just got super lucky because it can get bad. It can get really bad. And you know, especially when you have leaders that I think a lot of times what happens, they're very aware of what they're doing, and at the same time very unaware what they're doing. I think there's a level of like conscious and subconscious action that kind of come into play. But you know, I again, hindsight's 2020. I really think a lot of that stuff they had us do was how much can we get them to do stuff for us,
Yep.
you know? I
Yep.
mean, some of us went to their wedding, you
Oh,
know, like their
helped
weddings.
out.
Mhm.
Were there and um offered to do, whatever they needed. Yeah, you bet. And it became how high can you jump?
Yep. Yep. Oh, 100%. And so, you know, that I think that's the ultimate point of this podcast is to help other people see the warning signs and see, you know, like if your intuition is saying it, for the love of God, listen, because it would have saved so much hassle. But I think it's also really good to bring awareness to what's going on within us to make us vulnerable, which it's unfair we have to think that way. You know, I equate it to, you know, as women, like, should we go out at 3 a.m. walking down the dark alley by ourselves. We shouldn't have to not worry about that, but unfortunately, we do have to worry about that. And so you have to make wise decisions, because that's the world we live in. And I think that's kind of how I'm looking at this is how do we make better choices to protect ourselves because the world won't do it for us,
Well,
sadly.
we throw that education out there,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
right now, to go off that example, you can't go, well, you can, but you enter some risk if you go out walking at 3 a.m. in a dark alley.
Yeah.
But really, with more education that's put out there, the risk becomes less. And
Yeah.
hopefully, that's kind of what we can mitigate here a little bit is that with the education and the talking about it and the recognizing that the internet, great place for knowledge, also can be a very dangerous place if you're not fully aware within yourself and what you're doing. And it is
Hmm.
it's a great and terrible place.
Yeah. I often say the internet was the best and worst invention that's ever been created because there's so much knowledge and it can connect wonderful people together. We see that all the time. But at the same time, you have conspiracy theories, you have this grooming, because there are other online cults that have come out. One that just had a Netflix documentary, the Twin Flame
Yep.
cult that came out, and then you have one of the inspirations for us even doing this podcast is I watched the documentary on the Lisa Frank stuff
Yep.
that was happening, and there was a makeup element to that, and it was so triggering because it was so similar that I was like, whoa, I need to warn everybody who's still around. And I warned them. And that's when I was like, I think it's time for us to talk about this because, we're seeing more and more of these online cult themes coming out. And, it's really easy to say, well, I wouldn't do that or I wouldn't have been involved in that. I would have seen it right away. I have 2 master's degrees in sociology and social work. I work as a behavior specialist. My whole job is nothing but human behavior and people. And I
Yeah.
still got roped into it because they play on your vulnerabilities and your insecurities. And they find that one thing. And all it takes is that one insecurity because we all have them. You
Yeah.
might be the strongest person in the world, but if they find that one thing that you feel like you're missing, they got you. And
Yep.
that's all it takes. And and I even had strong people surrounding me. Like I said, my in real life best friend is in the group, and she was scammed as well. Like my other friend who's the one who introduced me to it, again, known her my whole life. She's a great mom, like a really strong person, and she got roped into it. Like, so it just takes that one little thing that can unite enough people together, and that's all it takes for a perfect storm of let's just use people.
Yeah.
Hmm. So I think that is kind of the general basis for why we're doing this. And these are our stories, and we want these other individuals to come on and share their story and talk about how it's affected them, and what their opinions are of things now and what they experience, just because a lot of us made TikTok videos after this ended. You can find a lot of TikTok videos, you can find a lot of YouTube videos where we talk directly about this, and they do use their names in them. But I think we're at the stage now of let's help others see what we now know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting that knowledge out there and just having an open and honest conversation. You
Hmm.
know, um, we're not we're not here to we're not here to hurt anybody necessarily or anything along those lines. Unfortunately, some of that stuff might happen as a
Hmm.
bit of, we recognize that. At the same time, if even a little bit of this information saves one other person, then I think that we've done our job at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, that knowledge at the end of the day is power, and
Mhm.
we need as much knowledge as we can get,
Oh
especially
my
if
gosh.
it.
Yeah, 100%. So if this is something that interests you, for our listeners, please share this everywhere, subscribe. We're going to have our socials attached to this. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. Please feel free to share. If you have questions, feel free to comment in our Instagram and YouTube comments. We will try to do question and answer time in each of our episodes, so that way we can, do our best. If we don't answer a specific question, it's probably because we're going to end up talking about it. It might be a theme for one of the episodes, so don't think that we're ignoring you, but we want to make sure that, we answer as much as we can. Like Jess said, if we can help at least one person, we've done what we've set out to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you soon.
Yeah.
Right.
Have a great
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or a story of your own about this organization, please feel free to email us. Our email will be linked in the description box. If you have experienced any trauma or abuse, please dial 988 for the crisis hotline. You are not alone. Please join us with our next episode, where we will be continuing to discuss what took place and how people are feeling about it today.